Once in a great while a man is born with such a temper of brain and will that he seems like a bright star among other men and can do things easily that are impossible for others to accomplish. 100 years before the birth of Christ, such a man was born in the city of Rome. His name was Julius Caesar, and he came from a long line of Roman noblemen, which ran back so far into history that it not only reached beyond the beginning of Rome itself, but was believed to have sprung from the goddess Venus. Caesar's father died when he was little more than a boy, and his mother was partly responsible for the greatness that he later maintained, for she strove constantly to develop in him those qualities of mind and character that were an inheritance from his family, although they were brought to far greater light in Caesar himself. Little is known of Caesar's boyhood. It is probable that it was not very different from that of other young Romans who belonged to nobility, or, as it was then called, the patrician class. He had a tutor named Nympho, who was not a Roman by birth, but a Gaul, that is, a man who came from one of the less civilized tribes that lived to the north of Italy, in the country that is now called modern France, and received from him the usual education. Apparently Caesar was not a prodigy when a young man, and there seemed little to distinguish him from any other young nobleman who went about the city in dandified apparel, with hair oiled and perfumed. But Caesar had quietly made up his mind to be the first man in Rome, and to surpass all others in greatness. Occasionally he showed this resolution, and once, on his birthday, when passing the statue of the great conqueror Alexander, he wept, because he had reached an age when Alexander had conquered the entire world, while he, Caesar, as yet had done nothing. Rome, in Caesar's boyhood, was embroiled in civil war, and the leaders of the Roman armies were constantly fighting among themselves. There had been a great public man named Marius, who championed the rights of the common people, or the plebeians, and who was greatly loved by the more humble men of Rome. But Marius had been overthrown by a fierce, cruel nobleman named Sulla, who made himself the head of the Roman state, and slew everyone who stood in his way. Here appeared the first sign that Caesar possessed the qualities of greatness, for while still a young man, he dared to defy the terrible Sulla. Caesar had just married Cornelia, the daughter of Cinna, and was ordered by Sulla to divorce her, but he resolutely refused to allow the word of the dictator to come between him and his wife, and was obliged to leave Rome by night to escape Sulla's vengeance. He fled into Samnium, but was followed there by Sulla's soldiers, taken prisoner and brought back to Rome. And Sulla would certainly have put him to death if some powerful men had not interceded for him and asked for his life. "I will grant this boon," said Sulla, with a glance that made them quail, "but take heed for this young man who wears his belt so loosely," meaning that he saw in Caesar dangerous qualities that might one day threaten the elaborate machine of Roman government. As all young Romans were obliged to serve in the army, and as Caesar was not safe in Rome where Sulla at any time might send assassins to murder him, he went to the far east where a Roman army was waging war against a king named Mithridates. At the siege of a town called Mytilene, Caesar so distinguished himself for bravery that he won the civic crown, for saving the life of a fellow soldier in the face of the enemy. When Sulla died, Caesar returned to Rome, and became one of the leaders of the party that had been against Sulla and his government. And Caesar did everything that he could think of to win power for himself, and damage Sulla's adherents. He became an orator and a lawyer, and prosecuted certain men who had misused the money of the people. But although it was clearly proved by Caesar that these men were no better than common thieves, the Roman senators and judges were so corrupt that it was impossible for Caesar to have them punished as they deserved. Caesar was not discouraged, however. He believed that if he had been a better orator, the men would have been brought to justice in spite of all the obstacles that stood in his path. So, on the advice of a friend named Cicero, who was the greatest orator in the world at that time, he started on a journey to Rhodes to study rhetoric under a great teacher of that art named Apollonius Molo. Travel from Rome was as dangerous as going to war, for there were bandits everywhere and the seas swarmed with pirates. And when Caesar took ship to go to Rhodes, the pirates swarmed about his vessel and took him prisoner. Because he was a nobleman and an important person, the pirates did not put him to death, but demanded ransom for him. They told Caesar the sum of money they had asked, and he agreed to obtain it for them, and haughtily told them that he was even greater than they had supposed, and worth 3 times the money they had demanded. So the pirates trebled the amount called for, and told Caesar that if they did not receive it, he would be put to a cruel death. But he waited unconcernedly, and while in the hands of the pirates he treated them almost as companions, and shared in their games and exercises. At times he even read to them poems and compositions of his own. But the pirates did not understand the high-flown Roman phrases, and did not give Caesar the applause that he believed his work had merited. "By the gods," he said laughing, "you are ignorant barbarians, unfit to live! When I am freed you had best look to yourselves, for I shall return and nail you to the cross." The pirates were angered by these words, but they did not slay their bold-tongued captive on account of the money they expected. And when Caesar's ransom came he was set free. But, true to his word, the first thing he did when set ashore was to gather some men and ships and pursue them. Setting upon them with the swiftness of lightning, he killed a great number and took many prisoners. And the pirates then found to their cost that he was a man of his word, for Caesar had every prisoner crucified, as he had warned them he would do. He then continued his journey to Rhodes as if nothing had happened, and studied rhetoric under Molo. And so apt a pupil was he that in a very short time he had become an orator second only to Cicero himself. Rome was in great turmoil and confusion at this time, and the vice of the men that ruled had weakened her power. There was a great revolt of slaves not only at Rome but throughout Italy, and the slaves formed into an army strong enough to defeat the Roman legions. The slaves barred the roads from Rome, captured their former masters, and made them fight as gladiators in the arena. They set towns afire, killed women and children, plundered, murdered, and cruelly ravaged the country, until they were defeated in battle by 2 military leaders who were sent against them, a rich man named Crassus, who was one of the most powerful men in Rome, and a soldier named Pompey, who was considered by the Romans to be one of the greatest generals that their city had ever seen. While these things were being accomplished, Caesar had finished his course in rhetoric and returned to Rome, and made his plans to win a glory greater than that of Pompey and Crassus, who were high in public favour through their victory over the slaves. To succeed in Rome without money was impossible in those days, for large sums had to be expended in bribery and in gaining the favour of the idle and dissolute Roman people, who refused to work but demanded to be amused at the expense of others, and would always follow the man who treated them with the greatest display of liberality. So Caesar borrowed huge sums of money, which he planned to repay from the sums he could gain once he was elected to public offices. It is not to be thought that Caesar always was honest and just, and it has already been shown that sometimes he was heartless and cruel. But in his favour it must be said that he never wantonly injured anybody, as so many others did in the cruel times in which he lived. And that in all things, except where his own power and future were concerned, he was merciful and temperate. Caesar became an official known as a quaestor, going to Spain in charge of certain affairs pertaining to Roman government. And later on he was made a curule aedile. In this office his generosity delighted the people. Caesar, with borrowed riches, made a lavish display to ensure future political favour in their hands, and was more magnificent than any of the aediles who had preceded him. At one time he displayed in the arena 320 pairs of gladiators, who fought with swords and spears, and with the net and trident, and he would have brought in a greater number had not the Senate feared to allow so many armed men in Rome at one time. But Caesar did something else that delighted the people even more than the show of the gladiators. One morning they beheld the statues of Marius, that had been overthrown by Sulla, set up once more in their old places, bright with gold and ornaments. Marius had been the people's idol, and Caesar, by this bold stroke, gained much of the popularity that had formerly been attached to that beloved leader. Another office that Caesar attempted to win was that of Pontifex Maximus, that is, the high priest and leader in all of the religious ceremonies of the Romans, an office with great power and prestige, and a stepping stone to greater things by far. Caesar staked everything on winning this office, and he increased his debts, which were already enormous, amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars in our money, to bribe and flatter and make sure of enough votes to win the election. He was so deeply in debt, he told his mother, that in case he did not win the office, he would be obliged to leave Rome, never to return. But luck was on his side, and he succeeded, making his term as Pontifex Maximus notable by revising the Roman calendar so thoroughly that, with only slight changes, it is used today. Later on he was made praetor, and by means of these various offices he succeeded in becoming one of the leading men in Rome, although his greatness was not yet as bright as that of Pompey, who had, as he said, only to stamp his foot to fill Italy with soldiers. Then there befell in Rome what was known as the conspiracy of Catiline, in which Caesar had a narrow escape from the intrigue and malice of the noblemen who hated him because he was a foe of Sulla's and a champion of the people. Catiline was a nobleman of violent temper and bad reputation. With many companions he strove to win public office in Rome, and plotted, if unsuccessful, to raise an army, set fire to the city, and place his party in power by rioting and violence. And under Catiline's government, Caesar, who probably knew nothing of the affair, was to be elected to public office in the new government. The conspiracy was discovered chiefly through the vigilance of Cicero, who was consul at the time. Catiline had fled from Rome and was raising an army, but a number of the other plotters were arrested. The noblemen who hated Caesar did everything in their power to have his name included in the list of the conspirators, but Cicero resolutely refused to believe that Caesar had been in league with them, and would not press the charges against him. Through the gifted oratory of Cicero, however, a sentence of death was brought against all the prisoners, who were promptly put to death in Cicero's presence. Caesar's wife, Cornelia, had died some time before these events took place, and Caesar had then married a relative of Pompey. At the festival of Bonadea, where only women were admitted, and which was held at Caesar's house because he was Pontifex Maximus, a great scandal took place owing to the fact that a young man, dressed in women's clothes, was discovered hiding in the house while the festival was going on. This bade fair to injure Caesar's name in the city, and partly on this account he divorced his wife Pompeia, saying that while nothing evil had been proved against her, yet Caesar's wife must be above even the breath of suspicion.
After this, Caesar went to Spain to govern that land for the Romans. While there he had much military experience that helped him to become one of the mightiest generals the world has ever seen, and in his struggles against the wild hill tribes he laid the seeds of success for his later wars in Gaul, wars in which he was to carry the Roman eagles into lands that had only been known by hearsay and legend.
When Caesar returned from Spain, he did his utmost to cement the bonds of friendship between himself and Pompey and Crassus, with Pompey because he was the greatest man in Rome, and because Caesar hoped to rise through his patronage, with Crassus because he was possessed of fabulous riches that Caesar would have great need of in fulfilling his ambitious designs. To strengthen his friendship with Pompey, he forced his own daughter to marry him. The alliance of these three men is called the First Triumvirate. Caesar was eager at this time to be elected to consul, an office that would give him great power in the Roman state, and with his usual success and some luck he succeeded in doing so. With him was elected another consul named Bibulus, who was put into office by the noblemen to check Caesar and limit his ambitious designs, which included doing all that he could to better the condition of the common people. But Caesar soon had the upper hand in all the affairs of the consulship, so that people said jokingly that the two consuls for the year were Julius and Caesar instead of Caesar and Bibulus. Among other things that Caesar accomplished was the passing of a land law that provided land for all of Pompey's old soldiers, and was also designed to give land to the people of Rome who were without occupation and often on the verge of starvation. Naturally, this law made Caesar even more popular with Pompey. As for the people, they cheered him lustily, and said among themselves that this Julius Caesar was certainly a most noble and generous leader. Had he not been the follower of Marius, and replaced his statues, which were overthrown by tyranny? Had he not provided games, the like of which people had never seen before? And now, by his land law, had he not shown that he was devoted to the poor, ready at all times to fight their battles, and to provide generously for them? Such were the means by which Caesar endeared himself to the Romans, and now was to come the opportunity by which at a single leap he placed himself above all others. The province of Gaul, which lay to the northwest of Italy, and included most of what is now modern France, was an extremely rich and fertile country, occupied by wild tribes that were hardly friendly to the Romans. Through his political power and much scheming, Caesar had himself made governor of all Gaul for 5 years. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, for he could not only make himself famous as a conqueror by subduing the Gaulish tribes, but could raise an enormous army devoted to his interests, by which he could take by force the entire control of the Roman state as Sulla had done before him. Naturally, Caesar did not voice these designs, but he entertained them just the same, and began a series of wars in Gaul, which over 1 million of his enemies are said to have perished on the battlefield. When Caesar entered upon his duties in governing Gaul, certain tribes came to him with complaints of a people called the Helvetii, who were leaving their own country, or what is now Switzerland, to enter upon the more fertile and less mountainous lands of their neighbours. Caesar mustered his soldiers and marched against the Helvetii, meeting them at a place called Bibracte. Here he showed how skilfully he could direct the Roman legions, for in a comparatively short battle the Helvetii were entirely overthrown, and a terrible slaughter followed. Caesar himself, in writing of this battle, says that out of 368,000 men, women and children, who composed the tribe of the Helvetii, only 110,000 were left after the battle. The poor beaten remnant of the tribe he ordered at once to retrace their steps into Switzerland and to enter Gaul no more. His success in dealing with the Helvetii turned the eyes of all Gaul upon the conqueror. Many tribes then asked his aid against Ariovistus, a German chief who came from across the river Rhine, and with his yellow-haired followers, clad in the skins of animals, were plundering the Gaulish province. Caesar, with the quickness that always won him success in battle, advanced against Ariovistus and completely defeated him, driving his men in confusion back across the Rhine to the lands they had come from. In the following spring there was a great danger that all Gaul would revolt to free itself from the control of the Romans. Of all the tribes that were opposed to him, Caesar considered that the Belgae, the people who lived in what is now Belgium, were the bravest and the most dangerous enemies against whom he must fight. So he marched against them and placed his legions behind strong fortifications until he could gain a favourable moment to come forth and attack them. The Belgae tried all sorts of tricks and ruses to draw Caesar from his position, but they did not succeed in doing this. Then, perhaps because they had not sufficient food, they commenced a retreat back to their own country, from which they had issued to attack Caesar. On their heels rode the Roman cavalry, who harassed them constantly, darting in and killing stragglers, and attacking the rear guard whenever the opportunity offered. One night, however, when the Romans were about to encamp in some wooded country on the river Sambra, 3 tribes of the Belgae fell upon them in a surprise attack that came so swiftly and so violently that the Roman legions were almost routed. Caesar's force was not wholly composed of Romans, and all the soldiers under his command except the Romans fled pell-mell from the field. But the Roman soldiers, in spite of everything, stood firm, displaying the marvellous discipline that had conquered the world, and soon had victory in their grasp. But the Roman soldiers were seldom merciful, and scarcely a foeman escaped the slaughter that followed. That winter Caesar returned to northern Italy, leaving his legions in Gaul under the command of his lieutenants. In his winter retreat he enjoyed himself and spent enormous sums of money, listening eagerly to the news of everything that had taken place in Rome since his departure. In the following spring his friend and political partner Crassus was killed while engaging in battle with the Parthians in the east, leaving Pompey and Caesar the only 2 men of first importance in Roman affairs. In that year also the Roman Senate prolonged Caesar's rule of Gaul for 5 years more. When spring came, Caesar led his legions from their winter encampments to battle against their enemies once more, and this time the victims of his skill were 2 German tribes who had again crossed the Rhine to invade Gaul. Caesar routed them and chased them back across the Rhine, building a bridge to pursue them into Germany. Then he came back to Gaul, destroying his bridge behind him, and made his plans to invade the island of Britain, which is now England, Scotland, and Wales. In Britain there lived tribes that were considered to hold the last extremity of the earth. Beyond them was nothing except mystery and darkness. Boats were built by the Roman soldiers, who had been trained by Caesar to turn their hand to any kind of labour, and the Roman army rowed across the English Channel to the island where the warlike Britons awaited their coming. the Romans sprang from their boat into water up to their necks and waded ashore to battle, killing and capturing a large number of Britons, many of whom Caesar took back with him into Gaul to adorn his triumphal entry into Rome when his term as governor of Gaul had come to an end. The Roman Senate was astonished at Caesar's success, and all Rome rang with his fame. The island of Britain was held to be the last extreme that Roman arms could reach, and hitherto had been nothing but a place of fables and wild sea tales, and the Senate declared a thanksgiving in Caesar's honor that was to last 20 days. That winter Caesar again returned to northern Italy, leaving his army under the command of his lieutenants, for, possessed of a great ambition to become the ruler of Rome, he desired to learn everything that was taking place there. His absence was taken by the Gauls as a sign that his power was weakening, and they considered that they had a splendid chance to revolt successfully and throw off the Roman power. And among them there sprang up a leader named Vercingetorix, who in his way was almost as great a genius as Caesar himself, possessed of boundless courage and hardihood. A revolt in Gaul at that time would endanger all Caesar's chances for success in Rome. Should his army be overcome, he would have no means of enforcing his power there, and a defeat would utterly destroy the prestige that he had built up among the Romans at the cost of so much money and labor. So Caesar hurried across the Alps, and after maneuvering his legions in a manner that showed to the world that he was a genius in the art of war, he succeeded in surrounding the greater part of the forces of Vercingetorix. To save his comrades, Vercingetorix gave in to Caesar, and galloped out of his stronghold to give up his sword. He laid his arms at Caesar's feet and surrendered himself as a captive. Caesar kept him as a prisoner for a number of years, after which time he was taken to Rome and forced to walk in the triumph of the conqueror. Then he suffered the fate of the captives of Rome. He was shut up in a dungeon and strangled, and his body was thrown upon one of the refuse heaps of the mighty city. Continued success in Gaul had by this time made Caesar's name so great in Rome that the Senate had grown to fear him. Pompey too was jealous of his growing power, and Caesar was finally ordered by the Senate to disband his army. The two officers of the people, called the tribunes, whose names were Antony and Cassius, vetoed this act on the part of the Senate, and were hunted from Rome and fled to Caesar's camp for refuge. Then the Senate, wildly afraid that Caesar would return at the head of his troops and become a tyrant like Sulla, declared war against Caesar and put in Pompey's hands the task of humbling his former friend. Caesar had no intention of disbanding his troops. His soldiers loved him deeply and would follow wherever he led them. And Caesar exhorted his men to stand by him, promising them honor and riches if he should succeed in overcoming his enemies at Rome. And the men with wild cheers swore that they would follow him to the death. At the head of a powerful and well-disciplined army that was devoted to him, Caesar advanced on Rome. When he came to a stream called the Rubicon, which marked the limit of his power as a governor of Gaul, he hesitated for a brief time, as there was still time for him to draw back from his tremendous venture had he seen fit to do so. But at length he plunged into the stream with the remark, "The die is cast," and advanced upon the city that he intended to win for himself. Pompey had been through an exceedingly hard time in getting soldiers to follow his banner, for the reputation of Caesar was very formidable, and his army even more so. Finding that it was impossible to make a stand against Caesar in Italy, Pompey fled across the Mediterranean Sea, leaving Caesar the master of Rome and Italy as well. Caesar, however, was not in the habit of leaving an enemy to fly unmolested. He pursued Pompey to Thessaly, and there fought a battle against him in which Pompey was utterly defeated and his soldiers scattered and routed. Pompey fled to Egypt, where Caesar followed him, and the first thing that was brought to Caesar when he arrived was Pompey's head. The once great Roman had been treacherously murdered by the Egyptians, who believed that in doing so they would curry favor with Caesar. In Egypt there was a beautiful queen named Cleopatra, who used all her great art to force Caesar to fall in love with her. She believed that when he loved her he would place her firmly on the Egyptian throne and send the Roman soldiers against her enemies. So completely did she succeed that Caesar, who had never been adverse to the charms of beautiful women, remained at her court for a considerable time and led his armies against a king named Pharnaces at Cleopatra's bidding. After this he returned to Rome, where he was made dictator, with absolute power, and was as great as Sulla had ever been. But there were still a number of Romans who refused to submit to his power, and Caesar was compelled to go once more to Africa to vanquish Pompey's friends, Scipio and Cato, who were raising a new army against him. With his usual military genius, he overthrew them easily and returned again to Rome. Nothing in Roman history equalled his welcome there. He was received as a returning king, and the honours that were heaped upon him were greater than had been given to any other Roman in all the long centuries that Rome had been a city. He was called Father of his country, and had a bodyguard of Roman noblemen to accompany him wherever he went. His person was considered sacred, and the month of Quintilis was called after his name, July for Julius, the name it has borne from that far time to the present day. Now, in his hour of triumph and greatness, Caesar showed himself of far different mettle from any Roman who had previously gained power over the state. He did not mar his success by murdering his enemies as Sulla had done, but rather sought to be the friend of all, and busied himself with good deeds and public works that would benefit the people. And while a royal crown was offered to him many times, notably by the same Mark Antony who had fled his camp as a fugitive when the Senate rose against his power, Caesar refused to accept it, believing that he could govern wisely and temperately without the name of king, which was bitter in the ears of all true Romans. However, his kindness did not save him, and his glory was short-lived. Certain Romans considered that their state had fallen under the power of a tyrant, and believed that Rome could be brought back to its former freedom by Caesar's death. A conspiracy was hatched against him among the senators, and one of its leaders was a man named Brutus, to whom Caesar had shown every kindness. Brutus, with his comrade Cassius and some 60 others, held secret meetings at night, in which they discussed the best way to murder Caesar, and it was finally decided that they would fall upon him with swords and daggers when he entered the Senate house. In connection with this evil plot a strange thing happened. Caesar was approached by an old man who claimed to be a prophet or a soothsayer. This man warned him that on a certain day, which began what was called the Ides of March, he must not stir out of his house or evil would come to him. Caesar laughed at this prediction, but on the night before this very day his wife, Calpurnia, had an evil dream in which she beheld spectres walking in the streets of Rome, and she begged Caesar, as he loved her, to remain at home. Caesar was about to give in to her request when Brutus called at his house to take him to the Senate, and, knowing of the conspiracy, of which he was one of the leaders, Brutus ridiculed Caesar for being frightened by the dream of his wife and persuaded him to go, although Calpurnia wept bitterly when he departed, believing that she would never see him again. On the way to the Senate Caesar passed the soothsayer, and remembering his prediction, called out to him that the Ides of March were come. "Aye, Caesar," replied the strange old man, "but not yet past." And Caesar entered the Senate. As he took his place he was surrounded by the conspirators who crowded around him with their weapons ready to hand under their cloaks and robes. And while one of their number presented a petition to Caesar and drew his cloak aside, Casca, another conspirator, stabbed him from behind. Then, as Caesar turned and grasped Casca's arm, the whole murderous pack of them set upon him, crowding and jostling each other to drive their weapons into his body. And when Caesar saw the hand of Brutus, his best friend, treacherously raised against him, he drew his cloak over his face so that he might keep his dignity in the agony of death, and exclaiming, "You too, Brutus?" fell at the base of Pompey's statue, which was stained with the lifeblood of the man who had conquered him. So died Julius Caesar, whose name is even brighter after 2000 years than it was in the time when he lived. As to the conspirators, they profited nothing by their deed, for the Romans, inspired by an oration made at Caesar's bier by Mark Antony, set fire to their dwellings and drove them from the city. Within 3 years not one of them remained alive. Rome soon proved that she could not live without a master, and the power that Caesar had won passed into other hands that were not so great or worthy as his own. End of chapter 2. Recording by Craig Gulliver.